There comes a time in a man's life when the noise stops. The phone stops ringing. The invitations slow down. The world feels like it's moving in circles and you're standing in the middle, still, silent, alone. And in that silence, you meet yourself. Most men panic when they find themselves alone. They think something is wrong. They think isolation is punishment, but they never realize that loneliness is one of the greatest teachers a man will ever encounter. A man with no friends isn't weak, he's transitioning, he's evolving, he's being pulled out of rooms he's outgrown, away from conversations that don't feed him, and stripped from distractions that slow him down. Being alone is not the end of your story. For many men, it's the beginning. When a man walks alone, something inside him begins to shift. The world gets quieter, the room gets smaller, and suddenly there's nothing left to hide behind. No noise to distract him, no voices to guide him, no familiar faces to lean on. Just him, his thoughts, his fears, his dreams, and the weight of his own choices. And it's in that silence, in that uncomfortable stillness, that he discovers the truth about himself. He learns what he's made of, not because someone told him, but because life demanded he find out. Most people will never understand that kind of journey. They've never had to stand alone. They've never had to carry their burdens without a hand to lighten the load or a voice to tell them you're doing the right thing. They've never been stripped down to the bare bones of their identity. But the man with no friends, he doesn't get that luxury. There's no backup waiting in the wings. There's no crowd cheering him on. There's no familiar comfort of knowing someone has his back. So he becomes the kind of man who doesn't expect it. He starts to walk differently. He begins to make decisions, not because others approve, but because his soul demands it. He stops looking for permission and starts trusting his own instincts. When you're alone long enough, you learn to operate without applause. You learn to push yourself without being pushed. You learn to build a backbone where fear once lived. There's a strength that comes from solitude, a kind of fire that only ignites when life turns cold. Picture the young man grinding after work, the one sitting in a tiny room with a laptop that barely works. His friends are out wasting time, chasing comfort, chasing moments that don't build a future. And there he is, watching tutorials, taking notes, practicing skills nobody believes he can master. People laugh at him. They tell him he's wasting his time. They say he should be doing what everyone else is doing. They call him obsessed, antisocial, strange, but he keeps going. Not because someone told him to, but because something inside him won't let him stop. He doesn't have a group motivating him. He doesn't have people checking on his progress. He doesn't have anyone saying, keep pushing, bro. So he becomes his own motivation. He becomes his own discipline. He becomes his own driving force. And that is where the transformation happens. Quietly, privately, without validation, without praise. That's the kind of growth no one sees coming. Most men crumble when they left alone. They think loneliness means they failed. They think isolation means nobody cares. But the man who embraces it, he becomes unshakable. He learns to process pain instead of running from it. He learns to stay committed even when no one is watching. He learns to face challenges without waiting for someone else to show up. The world tries to convince him that being alone is a weakness, but life shows him that it's one of the greatest strengths a man can develop. And something interesting happens during this season of isolation. Slowly, the doubt that once filled his mind begins to fade. Slowly, the fear that once held him back starts to loosen its grip. Slowly, he notices he's no longer making excuses. He's no longer delaying his goals. He's no longer waiting for the right time or the right people. He becomes self-reliant. And when a man becomes self-reliant, he becomes unstoppable. Months pass. Seasons change, and the same people who ignored him, who mocked him, who didn't believe in him, those people start to notice his growth. They start seeing the discipline he built. They start seeing the progress he's made. They start seeing the results of nights he spent alone building a future most of them were too afraid to imagine. Suddenly the messages come in. Bro, can you teach me? How did you do it? Can you help me get started? And in that moment, he realizes something profound. Isolation didn't break him. It built him. It carved him into someone stronger, sharper, more resilient. It taught him lessons no textbook could teach. It revealed parts of him he never knew existed. He learned to stand on his own, not because he wanted to, but because life forced him to. And that kind of strength, that quiet, earned, battle-tested strength, does not fade. It stays with him. It becomes part of his foundation. He may walk back into the world with people around him later, but he'll never again depend on them to hold him up. He has learned to hold himself. You see, standing alone isn't a punishment, it's preparation. Being friendless for a season doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means you're in training. Life isolates the man and intends to elevate. It separates him from the crowd so he can grow without interference. It forces him into silence so he can hear his own voice. It takes away distractions so he can focus on his purpose. A man with no friends doesn't walk in weakness, he walks with a deeper kind of strength. A strength forged by adversity, a strength crafted in the dark, a strength no one can take from him. And one day when he steps into the light and people wonder where that strength came from, he'll know. It came from the nights he stood alone and still didn't quit. There comes a moment in a man's life when he starts to see people for who they really are, not who he wishes they were. Sometimes that clarity hits him in the middle of a betrayal. Sometimes it comes after years of carrying relationships that never carried him back. And sometimes it arrives in the quiet season of having no friends at all, when the world seems empty and the room feels colder than usual. But in that loneliness, something powerful starts to happen. His vision sharpens, his judgment strengthens, his heart becomes wiser. Because a man with no friends learns, often the hard way, that not every friendship is worth keeping. Most men stay surrounded not because they're loved, but because they fear being alone. They fear what happens when the noise stops. They fear losing the comfort of being included, even if the people they sit with don't respect them, even if the conversations drain them, even if the laughter feels fake, even if the loyalty is one-sided. They cling to circles that stunt their growth, relationships that stunt their confidence, friendships that survive on convenience instead of connection. They know the bond is weak, but the fear of isolation keeps them tied to the wrong people. But when a man walks through a season where he stands alone, he starts valuing quality over quantity. He begins to understand that having the wrong people around is far worse than having no one at all. He remembers the times he showed up for people who never showed up for him. The times he celebrated others who couldn't even congratulate him back. The times he protected friends who would have thrown him under the bus without hesitation. That pain becomes a teacher, that disappointment becomes a compass, and slowly he learns to recognize the signs of low-value connections. He starts noticing the difference between someone who checks on him and someone who checks what he can offer. He sees who calls only when they need something, who talks behind his back but smiles in his face, who expects loyalty but never returns it, who disappears during his storms but reappears when the sun comes out. That kind of inconsistency becomes obvious once a man steps back and watches quietly instead of giving people endless chances. A man with no friends learns to trust actions over words, patterns over promises, consistency over charisma. And it's not just emotional, it's scientific. Studies show that people with smaller, high-quality social circles tend to live longer, have better mental health, and achieve more success. It's not because they isolate themselves, it's because they choose wisely. They don't waste energy maintaining shallow friendships. They don't drain themselves trying to carry people who refuse to grow. They don't spread their time thin trying to please everyone. Instead, they invest deeply in connections that matter, friendships built on respect, trust, honesty, and effort. A man who walks alone begins to understand the hidden cost of the wrong company, how friends can hold you back without ever saying a word, how their negativity becomes contagious, how their lack of drive pulls you downward, how their jealousy poisons your progress, how their drama distracts you from your goals, and how their comfort zone traps you in a version of yourself you've already outgrown. He starts to see how certain friendships lock him into habits he doesn't want anymore. Late nights, wasted time, pointless arguments, unnecessary risk, or conversations that never lead to growth. One day he wakes up and realizes he's been shrinking himself to fit into spaces that never appreciate his fullness. And in that moment, he understands that losing people isn't always a loss. Sometimes it's the start of finding himself. People often misunderstand the man with no friends. They call him cold, distant, arrogant, or antisocial. They assume something is wrong with him. But what if he simply refuses to settle? What if he wants depth over convenience? What if he values peace more than popularity? What if he has outgrown environments that no longer match the man he's becoming? Walking alone doesn't make him broken, it makes him aware. Imagine a man who finally lets go of the friends who mock his dreams. Suddenly he's focused, he's disciplined, he's productive, he's thinking clearly. Imagine a man who distances himself from those who constantly complain or gossip. Suddenly he's calmer, he's healthier, he's aligned with his purpose. Imagine a man who separates himself from people who are threatened by his ambition. Suddenly he's growing faster, dreaming bigger, moving smarter. When he removes the weight, he starts rising. There's a story many men experience but few talk about. A man who finally decides to cut off a friend he's known since childhood, not because of anger, not because of conflict, but because the friendship stays stuck in an old version of life. Uninspired, unmotivated, unchanging. And as that man grows into someone new, he feels the gap widening. The conversations don't hit the same. The goals aren't aligned, the values drift apart, so he makes the painful choice to walk away. People call him heartless. They say he forgot where he came from, but deep down he knows the truth. You can't carry everyone to the future. Some people were only meant to walk with you as far as their own growth allowed. A man with no friends learns that letting go isn't betrayal. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's survival, because when the wrong people leave your life, the right opportunities enter. When fake friends fall away, real blessings begin. When he stops trying to fit into places he's outgrown, he starts fitting into the life he was meant for. And here's the powerful part. A man who chooses to walk alone rather than walk with the wrong people is already winning. He's protecting his energy, he's safeguarding his future, he's valuing his peace, he's honoring his growth, he's choosing alignment over attachment, purpose over popularity, and self-respect over acceptance. In a world where most men settle for shallow friendships just to avoid sitting alone, the man who chooses solitude stands apart. He's not lonely, he's selective. He's not empty, he's intentional. He's not weak, he's wise. And wisdom is something only life, often through solitude, can teach. When a man finds himself without friends, something inside him shifts, quietly, slowly, almost without warning. The noise that once filled his life begins to fade. The constant buzzing of group chats, the pull of weekend plans, the unspoken pressure to stay connected, all of it starts to dissolve. And at first, that silence feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. But as the days pass, he realizes that silence is not empty, it's full of clarity, full of space, full of room to breathe and think and dream without interruption. When distractions disappear, a man grows into a version of himself he never knew existed. It's easy to stay busy. It's easy to blend into crowds, to follow routines, to lose hours in conversations that go nowhere. But when a man is stripped of all that noise, he starts seeing what his life actually looks like. He starts seeing what needs work, what needs healing, what needs building, what needs changing. And suddenly the things he has avoided, the things he buried under friendships, hangouts, and social obligations stand right in front of him. He can't hide behind people anymore. He can't run from problems. He can't distract himself with meaningless connection. He has to face himself. And facing yourself is the beginning of becoming high value. When the group chat fades out, something beautiful happens. Productivity increases. He's no longer checking his phone every few minutes for approval, jokes, updates, or validation. He isn't stretching himself thin trying to keep up with people who aren't growing at his pace. He isn't living a life managed by other people's expectations. Suddenly his mind clears, and in that clarity, opportunities appear that he once overlooked. Ideas he ignored now seem worth exploring. Habits that once felt impossible now feel necessary. He discovers time, real time, and he learns how powerful it can be. Time to think, time to build, time to heal, time to grow. A man with no friends carries a gift most men never touch: uninterrupted focus. With no one asking him to hang out, no one dragging him into drama, no one questioning his ambitions, he becomes free. Free to chase the version of himself he always imagined. Free to work without explaining his grind. Free to dream without apology. Free to pour his energy into something meaningful instead of scattering it across people who don't contribute to his future. Look at nearly every self-made success story, every man who built something from the ground up. There's always a chapter where he disappeared. A season where nobody saw him. A season where he said no to parties, no to late nights, no to distractions. While others were celebrating weekends, he was planning his future. While others were gossiping in group chats, he was studying, building, practicing, improving. While others cared about being seen, he cared about becoming someone worth seeing. In that season of isolation, that's where greatness is shaped. It doesn't happen when the spotlight is on you. It happens when nobody's watching. It happens when the world thinks you're doing nothing, but you're doing everything. It happens in the late nights when you're tired, but still pushing. In the early mornings when the rest of the world is asleep. In the quiet hours when you choose discipline over comfort. That's where character forms. That's where vision becomes real. That's where potential becomes power. It's in the quiet moments that a man finds himself. He learns to sit with his thoughts without fear. He learns what truly matters and what he's been wasting time on. He learns to cut out the habits that poison his progress. He learns to silence the voices that once controlled him. He learns to trust his own decisions, his own judgment, his own instincts. And once a man learns to trust himself, he becomes unstoppable. The loneliness that once stung becomes a shield. The silence that once felt heavy becomes fuel. The space that once felt empty becomes sacred. There's a reason the strongest, wisest, most disciplined men in history all spend time alone. Isolation sharpens a man. It removes the unnecessary and highlights the essential. It forces him to decide who he wants to be, not who others expect him to be. And when he stakes his identity on growth instead of approval, he becomes a man of value, a man people later admire, respect, and follow. Consider the athlete who trains alone long after the stadium lights are off. Consider the writer who spends nights typing when everyone else is asleep. Consider the musician practicing until his fingers bled in an empty room. Consider the student who studies alone while his friends party. Consider the entrepreneur building a business in silence while others laugh at him. They all go through the same chapter. The chapter where they disappear, where they sacrifice, where they say no to everything that doesn't align with their purpose. And then one day, their name is everywhere. One day, people admire their results. One day, the world claps for them. But nobody clapped when they were alone. Nobody celebrated their grind. Nobody saw their tears, their doubts, their fears, their sacrifices. All they saw was the final product, not the lonely path that built it. A man with no friends may look isolated, but he is focused. He may look lonely, but he is leveling up. He may look quiet, but his mind is loud with vision. He may look like he's missing out, but he's actually getting ahead. He may seem forgotten, but he's preparing for the moment when nobody can ignore him. The chapter of isolation is never wasted. It's never meaningless. It's never accidental. It's a necessary season. A refining season, a rebirth. A man who embraces that season becomes high value because he learns to invest his time, his attention, his energy, and his heart where it truly matters. And when he comes out of that chapter, he comes out stronger, sharper, wiser, and more disciplined than anyone expected because he didn't grow in the spotlight, he grew in the quiet. When a man walks alone long enough, something inside him begins to rise. Slowly, quietly, like a seed pushing through the soil in the dark. He starts realizing that he has no choice but to become everything he once looked for in others. He becomes his own advisor because no one else is around to guide him. He becomes his own mentor because the world isn't offering answers. He becomes his own motivator because the applause has gone silent. And he becomes his own strategist because life has forced him to build a blueprint with his own hands. That's when he learns the most powerful lesson solitude can teach, trusting his own vision. A man who walks alone learns to see life differently. He stops following trends and starts following purpose. He stops worrying about what people think and starts thinking about what truly matters. He stops trying to fit into spaces that shrink him and begins walking towards spaces that challenge him. When you're alone, you're no longer pulled by the expectations of others. You move at your own pace, in your own direction, fueled by something deeper than approval. You begin to understand that most people don't actually want you to grow. They want you to stay familiar. They want you to remain predictable. They want you to be the same version of yourself that makes them comfortable. But walking alone frees you from that prison. People with big visions almost always walk alone, not because they want to, but because what they see others can't understand yet. They look ahead while everyone else is looking around. They see what could be while others focus on what is. They imagine futures that haven't been built yet, and because of that, the world labels them as crazy, obsessed, or isolated. But the truth is, they're simply ahead of their time. Their dreams are too large to fit in the minds of people who stopped dreaming years ago. Their ambition is too heavy for people who never learned to carry their own. Their purpose is too bright for eyes that have grown comfortable in the dark. Think about inventors who spent years working alone in rooms nobody visited. People laughed at their ideas. They mocked their failures. They couldn't see the value because they lacked a vision. But those inventors didn't stop. They kept building, kept going, kept pushing, not because the world believed in them, but because they believed in themselves. Think about athletes who trained alone while others slept. At first, people questioned their discipline. They called them extreme, obsessive, or unrealistic. But later, when success came, the world called it talent. They never understood that the talent was built in silence, shaped by focus, and fueled by a vision only the athlete could see. Think about artists who created masterpieces people rejected at first. Their work was misunderstood, dismissed, even laughed at, but they trusted their craft. They trusted their voice. They trusted the image in their mind. Years later, people finally recognized the genius that was there all along. The common thread between all these stories is simple. Vision requires solitude. A man with a powerful vision has to learn to walk alone because the people around him haven't caught up yet. His circle is too small for his ambition. His environment is too limited for his future. His dreams are too big to fit inside the expectations of those who think small. And so life separates him, not to punish him, but to prepare him, not to isolate him, but to elevate him, not to weaken him, but to strengthen his faith in his own path. And something remarkable happens when a man stops needing validation. He becomes unstoppable, truly unstoppable. Because once he learns to depend on his own voice, nobody else's opinion can distract him. Once he learns to trust his own judgment, nobody's doubt can slow him down. Once he learns to value his own ideas, nobody's criticism can break him. He starts building with confidence instead of fear. He starts moving with clarity instead of confusion. He starts dreaming without limits instead of shrinking to fit someone else's comfort zone. He trusts his ideas even when they sound crazy to others. He trusts his gut even when it's pulling him in a direction nobody else understands. He trusts his vision even when it doesn't make sense to anyone but him. And with that trust, he begins to build, brick by brick, step by step, decision by decision. He builds the life he once saw only in his mind. A life people told him was impossible, a life he wasn't supposed to reach, a life that looked unrealistic until it became undeniable. A man with no friends learns to rely on something deeper than opinion, instinct. He begins to feel when something is right, even if it scares him. He begins to recognize opportunities that others overlook. He begins to move with a sense of purpose that doesn't need external approval to feel real. And as he keeps trusting himself, he becomes the kind of man others start trusting too. People begin to see strength in his decision, confidence in his silence, certainty in his direction. They may not understand how he built it, but they can't deny that he built something powerful. Walking alone teaches a man that the world doesn't have to believe in his dream for the dream to be real. It only has to be real to him. It teaches him that his vision is his responsibility, not something to be explained, not something to be justified, not something to be watered down for people who think small. It teaches him that he doesn't need a crowd to walk into his future. He only needs courage. And courage grows loudest in silence. A man who trusts his vision doesn't wait for permission. He doesn't shrink himself to avoid judgment. He doesn't slow down to make others comfortable. He moves because he must. He builds because he was meant to. He rises because his purpose doesn't allow him to stay where he is. And when he finally steps into the life he's been building, when the dream he once carried alone becomes visible to the world, people will say they always knew he'd make it, but he'll know the truth. He made it because he trusted himself when nobody else did. He believed in the future only he could see. He walked the road only he understood. And in the quiet, in the isolation, in the season of walking alone, he became the man he was destined to be. When a man finds himself walking alone, something begins to unfold within him that he never expected. At first, solitude feels like a punishment. The silence feels heavy. The days feel long, and the mind becomes louder than it has ever been. But with time, that same silence becomes a sanctuary. That same emptiness becomes a place of rebuilding. That same loneliness becomes a path towards something most men spend their entire lives running from: inner peace and spiritual growth. Solitude forces a man to look inward, and that is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Because when a man is surrounded by noise, friends, expectations, distractions, he doesn't have to face the truth. He doesn't have to confront his fears, his mistakes, his regrets, or the parts of himself he's been avoiding. But when he's alone, there's nowhere else to hide. The mirror becomes clearer. His inner voice becomes louder, and slowly, painfully, beautifully, he begins to heal wounds he never addressed. He starts acknowledging the pain he pushed aside, the heartbreak he ignored, the disappointments he buried, the betrayals he pretended didn't matter. He begins to reflect on the decisions he made when he wasn't thinking clearly, the habits that were holding him back, the patterns he kept repeating because they felt comfortable, even though they were destroying him. Solitude becomes a teacher, a mirror, a therapist. It forces him to sit with his emotions long enough to truly understand them, not just react to them. And that type of emotional control, the kind that comes from deep self-reflection, is something most men never experience because they never slow down enough to confront their inner world. A man with no friends often becomes spiritually grounded, not because he chooses to be, but because life pushes him toward it. With no constant external stimulation, he turns inward. He spends more time thinking, praying, meditating, writing, or simply sitting with silence. And in those moments, he begins to reconnect with something bigger than himself. He starts understanding that strength isn't just physical, it's internal. It comes from clarity, from stillness, from a sense of purpose that rises from quiet reflection. Studies show that even short periods of solitude, just 15 minutes a day, lower stress, sharpen thinking, and increase emotional intelligence. Imagine what happens to a man who lives a whole season of solitude. His mind clears, his spirit stabilizes, his heart softens, his decisions become wiser, his reactions calmer, his priorities more aligned with who he truly is. He stops living for the world's approval and starts living from his own truth. He becomes less reactive, more intentional, less chaotic, more peaceful, less driven by ego, more guided by purpose. In silence, he hears the things the world tries to drown out. He hears who he really is, not who people told him to be, not who his past shaped him to be, but who he is at his core. He hears where he's supposed to go, the direction his life should take, the path that aligns with his calling. He hears what truly matters: love, purpose, integrity, inner peace. Things far more valuable than popularity, status, or surface level friendship. He begins to separate what is real from what is temporary. He starts to let go of things he used to cling to, not because he no longer cares, but because he finally understands they were never meant for the man he's becoming. There's a specific kind of strength that grows in silence, a strength that doesn't shout, a strength that doesn't seek attention, a strength that flows from the inside out. When a man heals his inner world, everything in his outer world begins to change. He becomes more grounded. He becomes clearer in his decisions. He becomes harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, harder to break. His confidence no longer depends on how others see him. It depends on how he sees himself. His peace no longer depends on circumstances. It comes from within. His direction no longer changes with trends. It's guided by something deeper. He becomes the kind of man who doesn't fear being alone because he knows how to carry himself in solitude. He becomes the kind of man who doesn't crumble under pressure because he has already faced the storms inside himself. He becomes the kind of man who isn't easily shaken by the opinions of others because he's learned that his worth doesn't come from their approval. He becomes the kind of man who can walk into any room quietly, humbly, confidently, and hold his ground without saying a word. A man who finds peace alone becomes a man who can't be shaken in any crowd. He is not hardened by loneliness. He is strengthened by it. He doesn't become cold. He becomes centered. He doesn't become detached. He becomes aware. He doesn't become numb, he becomes wise. He stops reacting to life and starts responding to it. He stops seeking validation and starts seeking purpose. He stops chasing people and starts attracting the right ones through the calm, steady energy of a man who knows himself deeply. Solitude gives him something friendships often cannot: the space to grow without influence, the quiet to heal without judgment, and the clarity to understand his value without needing anyone to confirm it. And once a man discovers inner peace, once he becomes spiritually aligned, once he learns to trust his own mind and listen to his own soul, he becomes a force the world can't easily shake. He becomes grounded. He becomes focused. He becomes whole. And that transformation, born out of silence, shaped by solitude, strengthened by reflection, is what makes a man unmovable, unbreakable, and undeniably powerful. So if you're walking alone right now, don't be discouraged. It's not a punishment, it's preparation. Your silence is your training ground. Your solitude is your sharpening season. Your loneliness is turning you into someone even you haven't met yet. One day, you're going to look back and thank God, the universe, or fate for removing the wrong people to make space for the right purpose. Walk alone for now, because the man you're becoming deserves a different level of company.